The first time Natalie Ziegler noticed him was on a particularly hectic Tuesday lunch rush at Bistro Soleil. He sat alone at table 7, absorbed in a sleek leather portfolio, while absent-mindedly running his finger along the rim of his water glass. Most of the restaurant's regular business crowd barely looked up from their phones during their hurried meals, but something about his quiet focus made her pause before approaching his table. "Good afternoon. I'm Natalie, and I'll be taking care of you today. Can I start you off with something to drink?" she asked, pen poised over her notepad. He looked up, and Natalie was momentarily caught off guard by the intensity of his blue eyes. They crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. "Just water is fine for now, thank you," he replied, closing his portfolio. "And I'll have the roasted salmon with seasonal vegetables." "Excellent choice," she nodded, jotting down his order. "The chef does amazing things with the citrus glaze on that dish." Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps, that she had offered a genuine comment rather than a robotic server response. "In that case, I'm looking forward to it even more." As Natalie turned to submit his order, she didn't think much of the brief exchange. The restaurant catered to downtown business professionals, and handsome men in expensive suits were hardly a novelty. But she couldn't have predicted that this particular customer would become a fixture in her section every Tuesday and Thursday for months to come. His name, she later learned, was Connor O'Neill. A fact that became relevant only because, unlike most regulars who remained essentially anonymous despite their frequency, Connor made an effort to be remembered. "Natalie," he acknowledged with a slight nod on his third visit. "How's your day going so far?" She had been surprised he remembered her name. "It's going well, thank you. Back for the salmon. Actually, I thought I'd try the special you mentioned last time, if you still recommend it." The fact that he recalled her recommendation from a previous visit struck her as unusual. Most customers barely registered servers as people, let alone remembered their suggestions. "Absolutely. The chef's doing a pan-seared halibut today that's pretty incredible." By his fifth visit, Connor had established himself as a creature of habit. Always table 7 when available. Always between 12:15 and 12:30. Always dressed impeccably. Though Natalie began to notice the subtle variations in his wardrobe, the navy suit with faint pinstripes for important meetings, the charcoal gray when he seemed more relaxed, the occasional absence of a tie when he came in on Thursdays. "Someone's getting comfortable with us," she teased one Thursday, nodding at his open collar as she set down his usual sparkling water with lime. Connor looked momentarily confused before glancing down at himself. "Ah, the tie. Important client meeting this morning, but they signed." "No need for the full armor the rest of the day." "Congratulations," Natalie replied. "What line of work are you in, if you don't mind me asking?" "Manufacturing, medical devices." His answer was simple but not dismissive. "O'Neill Biomedical. We make specialized equipment for hospitals and research facilities." Natalie nodded, not recognizing the company name but making the connection that he must be fairly high up to be taking clients to signing meetings. "That must be interesting work." "It can be. Though sometimes less interesting than watching the dynamics of this place." He gestured vaguely around the restaurant. "You all move like a well-choreographed performance." The observation caught her off guard that he had been paying attention not just to his food or his business affairs, but to the workings of the restaurant itself. "Well, lunch rush is our daily recital, though I think we're more of a controlled chaos than a choreographed performance." She smiled. "Can I get you started with the soup today? The chef's tomato bisque is exceptional." "I trust your judgment," he replied, and something about the way he said it made her pause momentarily before nodding and heading to the kitchen. What Natalie didn't know then was that Connor O'Neill was not just an employee at O'Neill Biomedical, he was its CEO and founder. She also didn't know that his choice of Bistro Soleil had been random the first time, a last-minute decision when his usual lunch spot had been closed for renovations. But his return visits had been entirely deliberate, scheduled around the possibility of being seated in her section. For Connor, the midday breaks at Bistro Soleil quickly became the highlight of his otherwise tightly scheduled week. There was something refreshing about Natalie's straightforward manner, professional, but never artificial, attentive without being overly familiar. In a world where people either wanted something from him or were intimidated by his position, her natural ease was like a breath of fresh air. As weeks turned into months, their twice-weekly interactions developed a comfortable rhythm. Connor learned that Natalie was taking night classes at the local university, though he never pressed for details when she seemed busy. She discovered his preference for the corner table when discussing business on his phone, and his appreciation for the chef's more experimental specials. "You're the only one who ever orders that," she told him one day, setting down a plate of the chef's latest creation, a complex dish featuring ingredients most customers found too adventurous. "Most people prefer what they know," he replied. "I found that calculated risks often yield the best results, in food and business, and life in general." He looked up at her with that same steady gaze that had struck her the first day. "Though I admit, I partly order these dishes because I enjoy your descriptions of them. You have a gift for making even sea urchin foam sound appealing." Natalie laughed. "That's just good salesmanship, though I do appreciate customers willing to try the chef's more creative efforts. He gets discouraged when everyone just orders the salmon. We can't have that. Next time, tell me what he's most proud of that nobody's ordering, and I'll be his test subject." These small exchanges accumulated over time, building a connection that was professional but increasingly personal. Natalie found herself looking forward to Tuesdays and Thursdays, anticipating Connor's arrival and the brief conversations that punctuated her hectic shifts. For his part, Connor began scheduling his workdays around these lunches. His assistant, Deanne, had noticed the pattern after the first month. "You've blocked off your calendar every Tuesday and Thursday from 12 to 1:30, she observed one morning, coffee in hand as they reviewed his schedule. "Board meetings are always Mondays and Wednesdays now. Is this the new normal?" Connor nodded without elaboration. "For the foreseeable future, yes." Deanne, who had worked with him for 7 years, knew better than to press further. Connor had always been intensely private about his personal life, but she couldn't help noticing the subtle changes in his demeanor over recent months, a certain lightness that hadn't been there before, a tendency to check his watch as noon approached on certain days of the week. Meanwhile, Natalie's coworkers had definitely noticed Connor's regular appearances and his apparent preference for her section. "Your businessman is back," her colleague Eliza would announce with a knowing smile whenever Connor entered the restaurant. "Table 7 as usual." "He's not my anything," Natalie would respond, though she couldn't deny the small flutter of anticipation she felt. "He just likes the food here." "Uh-huh, and he always requests your section because I don't try to upsell him on the most expensive wine or rush him through his meal," Natalie countered. "It's called good service." But even as she dismissed her coworkers' teasing, Natalie had to admit there was something different about Connor. Unlike other regulars, he never treated her with condescension or failed to acknowledge her presence. He remembered details from their conversations, asked follow-up questions about her classes, and actually seemed interested in her responses. One rainy Thursday, nearly 4 months into this routine, Connor arrived later than usual. The lunch rush had subsided, and Natalie was folding napkins at the service station when he appeared, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. His usually perfectly styled dark hair was damp from the rain, and his expression was tense. "I was beginning to think you weren't coming today," she said as she approached his table. "Rough morning." Connor ran a hand through his hair, leaving it slightly mussed. "You could say that." 3 back-to-back meetings that should have been emails, and a production delay that's going to cost us significant money. He paused. "I almost didn't come, but I realized this lunch might be the only peaceful moment in my day." Something about the admission, the glimpse of vulnerability from someone who always seemed so composed, caught Natalie off guard. "Well, I'm glad you made it," she said sincerely. "The chef made that spicy seafood stew you liked last time. Should I put in an order?" "Perfect," Connor replied, the tension in his shoulders visibly easing. "And maybe a glass of the Sansera today." As she headed to place his order, Natalie found herself contemplating their peculiar relationship. Was it simply the rapport that naturally develops between servers and regular customers? Or was there something more to the way she found herself looking for him on Tuesdays and Thursdays, feeling a small disappointment on the rare occasions when he didn't appear? When she returned with his wine, Connor looked more like himself again, his momentary discomposure replaced by his usual calm demeanor. "How are your classes going?" he asked as she set down the glass. "Challenging but good." "I've got midterms coming up next week, so it's been a bit hectic balancing everything." "What are you studying, if you don't mind my asking? I don't think you've ever mentioned." "Marketing and business administration," Natalie replied. "I'm in my final year." Connor looked genuinely interested. "Any particular industry you're aiming for?" "Hospitality, ideally. I've worked in restaurants since high school, but I'd like to move into the management and marketing side eventually. Maybe hotel groups or restaurant development." She paused, suddenly aware she was sharing more than usual. "Sorry you didn't ask for my 5-year plan." "No, but I'm glad to hear it." His blue eyes held a warmth she hadn't noticed before. The industry would be lucky to have someone with both practical experience and formal education. Too many people have one but not the other. The genuine nature of his encouragement stayed with Natalie throughout the remainder of her shift. It wasn't the empty flattery she occasionally received from customers trying to increase their chances of attentive service. It felt like real respect, the kind rarely extended to someone wearing an apron and carrying plates. As winter turned to spring, the pattern continued. Connor's visits became such a fixture in Natalie's schedule that she found herself arranging her shifts to ensure she was working during his usual lunch times. What she didn't realize was that Connor had been gathering the courage to break their comfortable routine. The opportunity came on an unusually quiet Thursday afternoon in April. The restaurant was half empty due to a local event that had drawn most of the business crowd elsewhere. Connor had lingered over his coffee longer than usual, and Natalie had found herself making excuses to check on his table even though they both knew he needed nothing. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked, approaching his table for what was probably the 5th unnecessary time. Connor looked up from the document he'd been reviewing, his expression suddenly resolute. "Actually, yes." He hesitated briefly before continuing. "I've been coming here twice a week for almost 6 months now, and while the food is excellent, I think we both know that's not the only reason I keep coming back." Natalie felt a flush creep up her neck, but she didn't interrupt. "I've enjoyed our conversations, Natalie. I look forward to them more than I probably should admit." He took a breath. "I'd like to continue one of those conversations sometime, perhaps over dinner instead of across this table." The request hung in the air between them. Natalie was no stranger to being asked out by customers. It came with the territory in the service industry. Her standard response was always a polite but firm refusal. The power dynamic between server and customer made dating complicated at best, inappropriate at worst. Yet something about Connor's approach gave her pause. He hadn't assumed, hadn't pressed, hadn't made her feel cornered. He'd waited months, building a rapport based on mutual respect before making any personal overture. "I realize this puts you in an awkward position," he continued when she didn't immediately respond. "And if you'd prefer to keep our interaction professional, I completely understand. Nothing would change about my coming here." Natalie considered her options carefully. Connor was attractive, thoughtful, and seemed genuinely interested in her as a person rather than just a server bringing his meals. But there were still the practical concerns, the fact that he was clearly successful and established, while she was a student working her way through school. Not to mention the complications of dating a regular customer. "I appreciate the invitation," she began carefully, "but I generally don't mix my work and personal life." She saw disappointment flicker across his face but continued. "However, if you're serious about wanting to talk outside of this setting, maybe we could start with coffee. Something casual." The smile that spread across Connor's face made her immediately question whether she'd made a reckless decision. There was a boyish charm to his obvious pleasure that contrasted sharply with his usual composed demeanor. "Coffee would be perfect," he replied, making an effort to temper his enthusiasm. "Whenever works with your schedule." Natalie surprised herself by pulling out her order pad, writing her number on it, and sliding it across the table. "Text me, and we can figure out a time that works for both of us." As Connor carefully tucked the paper into his wallet, Natalie felt a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. She had just taken a significant detour from her usual professional boundaries. But watching him thank her with an understated sincerity that matched everything she'd observed about him over the past months, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. What neither of them fully appreciated in that moment was how this simple exchange would dramatically alter the course of both their lives in the months to come. Connor waited until he was back in his car to look at the phone number Natalie had written down, half expecting to find it was missing a digit or otherwise intentionally incorrect, a polite way for her to seem agreeable while avoiding actual contact. But the number appeared complete, written in a clear, decisive hand that matched what he'd observed of her character. He debated texting immediately, but decided that would seem too eager. Instead, he placed his phone in the center console and drove back to the O'Neill biomedical headquarters, trying to focus on the afternoon of meetings ahead rather than the prospect of seeing Natalie outside the confines of the restaurant. His attempt at professional compartmentalization was immediately undermined when he walked into his office to find his VP of Operations, Marcus Chen, waiting with an urgent production issue that required his attention. After 40 minutes of problem-solving, Marcus lingered in the doorway with a curious expression. "You seem different today," he observed. "Good meeting at lunch." Connor glanced up from his computer. "Just the usual." "Why?" Marcus shrugged. "I don't know, you've got this energy about you. Like you closed a major deal or something." "No deals today. Just a productive lunch." Connor redirected the conversation, but Marcus's observation stayed with him throughout the afternoon. By 6 o'clock, Connor decided enough time had passed to send a text without appearing overeager. He kept it simple. "This is Connor from Bistro Soleil. Thanks for agreeing to coffee. Would Saturday morning work for you?" He sent the message before he could overthink it, then set his phone aside and continued reviewing quarterly projections. When it chimed 10 minutes later, he tried not to reach for it too quickly. "Saturday works," 10 a.m. at Momentum Coffee on 5th. The reply was direct and practical, exactly what he would have expected from Natalie. He confirmed the time and place, then sat back in his chair, a sense of anticipation building that he hadn't felt in years. Connor had been so focused on building O'Neill Biomedical over the past decade that his personal life had become almost non-existent. The occasional dates arranged by well-meaning friends or business associates had never progressed beyond polite conversation. Most women he met were either intimidated by his position or primarily interested in the lifestyle it afforded. Natalie was different. She didn't know he was the CEO, just that he worked for the company. She treated him like a regular person, no special deference, no artificial interest. Their conversations were genuine, their connection based on actual compatibility rather than circumstance or convenience. Saturday arrived with uncharacteristic anxiety for Connor. He deliberated longer than usual over his wardrobe, finally settling on dark jeans and a light blue button-down, casual enough for weekend coffee, but still put together. As he drove to Momentum Coffee, he reminded himself that this was just coffee, not a formal date, and that lowering his expectations was the prudent approach. All rational perspective vanished the moment he saw Natalie waiting outside the coffee shop. Away from the restaurant, dressed in slim jeans and a soft green sweater, her long chestnut hair loose around her shoulders instead of in its usual practical ponytail, she looked both familiar and completely new. "You found it," she smiled as he approached, a hint of nervousness in her expression that he found endearing. "I did, though I should confess I've been here before. They make excellent espresso." They entered the busy cafe together, falling into conversation with surprising ease as they ordered and found a small table by the window. Without the interruptions of her job or his business calls, they discovered a natural rhythm to their interaction. "So, O'Neill Biomedical," Natalie said after they'd settled with their drinks. "What exactly do you do there? I realize you've mentioned medical devices, but that's pretty broad." Connor hesitated. This was the moment where he usually revealed his position, but something held him back. He didn't want to change the dynamic between them so soon. "We develop and manufacture specialized equipment for minimally invasive surgeries," he explained. "I work primarily with the product development team, helping bridge the gap between the engineers and the business side." It wasn't a lie exactly. He did work closely with product development, though as CEO his role encompassed far more than that. "That sounds fascinating," Natalie replied. "Do you have a medical background or more business?" "Business primarily, with enough medical knowledge picked up along the way to be dangerous," he smiled. "What about you? Has it always been hospitality?" As Natalie described her journey from high school restaurant jobs to her current studies and ambitions, Connor found himself more impressed with each detail. She had worked continuously while pursuing her education, managing full-time employment alongside a demanding course load. Her passion for the hospitality industry was evident in how she spoke about creating experiences for people rather than just serving food. "The restaurant is a means to an end right now," she explained. "It pays the bills and gives me practical experience. But eventually, I'd like to be developing concepts and marketing strategies for new venues. There's something incredible about creating spaces where people connect over food and drink." "I can see that," Connor nodded. "You have a natural talent for making people feel comfortable. I've noticed how you adapt your approach with different customers at the restaurant." Natalie looked surprised. "You've been paying attention." "More than I probably should admit," he acknowledged with a slight smile. "Professional hazard, I tend to observe patterns and details." Their conversation flowed from professional aspirations to books, they'd recently read, films they'd enjoyed, and places they hoped to visit someday. What had been scheduled as a quick coffee extended to nearly 2 hours as they discovered layer after layer of common interests and complementary perspectives. When they finally left the cafe, Connor walked Natalie to her car, feeling an unexpected reluctance to end their time together. "This was nice," she said as they reached her modest sedan. "Different seeing you without having to refill your water glass every 10 minutes. "I hope it won't be the last time," Connor replied, his tone making the statement a question. Natalie looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. "I'd like that, though I should probably mention that I have a pretty tight schedule between work and school. I don't have a lot of free time." "I understand completely. My calendar isn't exactly open either," he paused, "but I think it's worth making time for the right things." The simple sincerity of his statement earned him a genuine smile. "Text me next week. Maybe we can figure something out." As he watched her drive away, Connor was struck by a realization that both excited and terrified him. For the first time in years, he was genuinely interested in pursuing someone completely unrelated to his business ambitions. Back at her small apartment, Natalie found herself replaying their conversation as she settled in to study for an upcoming marketing exam. She had agreed to coffee mainly out of curiosity, half expecting to discover that the connection she'd felt with Connor at the restaurant was just a product of the server-customer dynamic. Instead, she'd found him even more engaging outside that context, intelligent but not condescending, successful but not arrogant, attentive without being intense. There were practical concerns, of course. Her life was already overflowing with responsibilities between full-time work and school. She had deliberately avoided serious relationships during her final year of studies, knowing she didn't have the time or energy to invest properly. And then there was the question of their apparent differences. Connor clearly came from a world of business lunches and tailored suits. While he hadn't mentioned specifics, she could tell from subtle details: his watch, the quality of his casual clothes, his car, that he was substantially more established financially than she was. Yet despite these concerns, Natalie found herself looking forward to his text the following week. When it came on Tuesday afternoon, suggesting dinner that Friday evening, she surprised herself by rearranging her study schedule to accept. Their dinner at a small Italian restaurant near the university campus further confirmed their compatibility. Connor listened attentively as she described her marketing project, developing a launch strategy for a hypothetical boutique hotel. He asked insightful questions and shared relevant experiences from his own work without dominating the conversation. "The professor essentially tore apart my initial concept," Natalie explained as they shared a tiramisu. "But his criticisms were valid. I was thinking too conventionally, trying to appeal to everyone rather than finding a specific niche and owning it completely." "That's a common mistake," Connor nodded. "We face the same challenge with product development. The temptation is always to broaden your market, but sometimes narrow and deep is more effective than wide and shallow." "Exactly. So I'm reworking it to target a very specific demographic: business travelers who prioritize wellness and sustainability. Higher price point but more distinctive positioning." "Smart. That segment is growing rapidly, and they're willing to pay for authenticity." His eyes lit up as he spoke. "You know, we're constantly balancing those same considerations with medical devices. How specialized do we make each product? Do we create different versions for different markets? It's fascinating how business principles apply across industries." Their conversation continued seamlessly from marketing strategy to Connor's recent challenges with international regulatory approvals, finding surprising parallels between their different worlds. By the time he walked her to her car, Natalie felt a growing certainty that this connection was worth pursuing, despite the complications. "I have a confession to make," Connor said as they stood beside her car. "I've been looking forward to this all week." The simple admission, delivered with unguarded sincerity, touched Natalie more than any elaborate compliment could have. "Me too," she admitted. "Though I probably shouldn't tell you that. I'm supposed to maintain some mystery, right?" Connor shook his head, smiling. "I think we're past the stage of strategic ambiguity. At least, I hope we are." When he leaned down to kiss her, it felt like both a beginning and a continuation, the natural progression of a connection that had been building layer by layer over months of accumulated moments. As their relationship developed over the following weeks, they settled into a rhythm that accommodated both their busy schedules. Connor still came to Bistro Soleil for lunch on Tuesdays and Thursdays, maintaining their original connection point while building new ones outside the restaurant. They met for dinner when Natalie's work and school schedule allowed, for coffee between Connor's meetings, for walks in the park on weekend mornings. It was during one of these morning walks, nearly 2 months after their first coffee date, that Connor finally decided to address the subject he'd been carefully avoiding. "There's something I need to tell you about my work," he began as they strolled along the river path, coffee cups in hand. Natalie glanced up at him. "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous, just overdue." He took a breath. "I haven't been completely forthcoming about my position at O'Neill Biomedical. I'm not just part of the product development team." "Oh," Natalie's expression was curious but not alarmed. "I'm the CEO and the founder. It's my company." He watched carefully for her reaction, unsure what to expect. Surprise, certainly. Perhaps anger at his omission. What he didn't anticipate was her burst of laughter. "Connor, I've known that for weeks," she said, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "Google exists, you know." Connor stopped walking, genuinely stunned. "You knew, and you didn't say anything." "I figured you had your reasons for not mentioning it right away, and then it seemed like a weird thing to bring up." She shrugged. "Like, hey, by the way, I internet stalked you and discovered you're actually the boss, not just a regular employee." "When did you look me up?" "After our first coffee date. I was curious." She took a sip of her drink, watching him over the rim. "I was impressed by your talk about product development, so I wanted to see what else the company did. Your name and photo are all over the website." Connor processed this revelation. "And you weren't, I don't know, upset that I hadn't been upfront about it?" "At first, I wondered why you downplay it. Then I realized you probably didn't want it to change how I saw you." She reached for his hand. "I appreciated that, actually. It showed you valued our connection for what it was, not what your position might mean to me." Relief washed over him. "That's exactly it. Most people treat me differently when they know. Either they are intimidated, or they're suddenly very interested in what I can do for them." "Well, I already know what you can do for me," Natalie replied with a mischievous smile. "You can keep leaving those excellent tips at the restaurant. My rent appreciates it." Her teasing broke the remaining tension, and Connor laughed, pulling her close for a quick kiss. "I was worried this might change things between us." "The only thing that's changed is now I know why you're always checking your phone during our dates," she said, poking his chest lightly. "CEOs never really go off duty, do they?" "I'm working on that," he promised. "Actually, that leads me to something else I wanted to talk about. I have to go to Chicago next weekend for a medical technology conference. I'll be presenting our newest surgical navigation system." He hesitated. "I was wondering if you might consider coming with me." The invitation represented a significant step forward their first trip together, an introduction to his professional world, A long weekend away from the routines they'd established. Natalie's immediate instinct was to decline. Her midterm exams were the following week, and she'd planned to use the weekend for intensive studying. But the hopeful expression on Connor's face made her reconsider. "I have exams coming up," she said, "but I could bring my study materials. Maybe study in the hotel while you're in meetings." The smile that lit up Connor's face told her she'd made the right decision. "Absolutely. The conference is just Friday and Saturday. We could fly back Sunday afternoon, giving you more study time, and I promise not to distract you too much." "Somehow I doubt that promise," she laughed, but the prospect of exploring a new city with Connor, of seeing him in his professional element, was increasingly appealing. "But yes, I'd love to come." The Chicago trip marked a turning point in their relationship. Watching Connor deliver his keynote presentation to a packed auditorium of medical professionals, Natalie saw a side of him she'd only glimpsed before. On stage, he was commanding but approachable, passionate about the technology but equally focused on its human impact. He spoke about improving patient outcomes with the same genuine care she'd observed when he interacted with the busboys and kitchen staff at Bistro Soleil. Later, at the reception, she observed how people gravitated toward him not just because of his position, but because he listened with authentic interest to researchers, doctors, and technicians alike. He introduced Natalie to colleagues and competitors without explanation or apology, his hand resting comfortably at the small of her back as they navigated the crowd. "Your boyfriend is something of a celebrity in this industry," commented a woman who introduced herself as the chief surgeon at a prestigious hospital. "His navigation systems have revolutionized how we approach certain procedures. Patients who would have faced major operations with lengthy recoveries can now go home the same day." The casual use of boyfriend caught Natalie off guard. They hadn't explicitly defined their relationship in those terms, but she found she didn't mind it. "He's very passionate about the work," she replied, "though I'm still learning about the technical details." "Technical details are overrated," the surgeon smiled. "What matters is understanding the why, and Connor has always been clear about that. It's about the patients, not just the technology. That's relatively rare in this industry." Throughout the weekend, Natalie gained a deeper appreciation for the world Connor had built. She studied in their hotel suite while he attended sessions, then joined him for dinners with colleagues and explorations of the city. They moved together with an easy synchronicity that felt both new and somehow familiar, as if they'd known each other far longer than a few months. On their final night in Chicago, over dinner at a small restaurant overlooking the river, Connor reached across the table to take her hand. "Thank you for coming this weekend," he said. "Having you here has meant more than I can express." "I've enjoyed it," Natalie replied honestly. "Seeing you in your element is pretty impressive." "Though I'm still partial to the Connor who sits at table 7 and agonizes over whether to try the special," he laughed. "That Connor is the real one, I promise. All of this," he gestured vaguely toward the conference center in the distance, "is just what I do, not who I am." "I know that," she said softly. "It's why I'm here." Something shifted in his expression, an unguarded vulnerability replacing his usual composed demeanor. "Natalie, I need to tell you something. These past few months have been. I've never connected with anyone the way I connect with you. I know we haven't been together long, but I'm falling in love with you." The words hung between them, honest and unembellished. Natalie felt a surge of emotion that both thrilled and terrified her. She had been carefully managing her feelings, aware of how quickly their relationship had progressed, conscious of the potential complications. But in that moment, looking at Connor's open expression, All her careful boundaries seemed irrelevant. "I love you too," she said simply. "I think I have for a while now." The kiss they shared across the table was gentle, but filled with promise, a commitment to whatever might come next. Returning to their regular lives after Chicago brought both challenges and deeper connection. Natalie plunged into her exams while continuing her shifts at Bistro Soleil. Connor faced a regulatory hurdle with a new product line that required his focused attention. Yet despite their busy schedules, they found themselves increasingly weaving their lives together. Connor started keeping study materials at his downtown condo for the nights Natalie stayed over. She cleared a drawer for his things in her small apartment. They established traditions: Sunday morning runs along the river, takeout and movies on Wednesday evenings when Natalie didn't have class. Connor working on his laptop at Natalie's kitchen table while she studied for exams. For Natalie, the most surprising adjustment wasn't the growing intimacy or shared routines, it was reconciling the different facets of Connor's life. The man who made her coffee in his luxurious kitchen was the same person who commanded boardrooms and made multi-million-dollar decisions. The contrast was occasionally jarring, particularly when elements of his wealth or status emerged unexpectedly, like the evening he casually mentioned needing to attend a charity gala the following weekend, adding, "I hope you'll come. Black tie, unfortunately." Natalie had frozen, spoon halfway to her mouth as they ate ice cream on her couch. "Black tie? Connor, I don't exactly have gala-appropriate dresses hanging in my closet." He'd looked genuinely confused for a moment, then understanding dawned. "I'm sorry, I didn't think we could go shopping this weekend. Or I could have my assistant arrange for some options to be sent over." "Your assistant doesn't need to dress me," Natalie had replied, more sharply than intended. "And I can't afford the kind of dress that belongs at the events you attend." Connor had set down his ice cream carefully. "I didn't mean to presume. I'd like to buy the dress as a gift if you're comfortable with that, but if you'd rather not attend, I completely understand." His measured response had diffused her defensive reaction, making her examine it more closely. "I'm sorry. I think I'm still adjusting to certain aspects of your life. The differences in our circumstances can be disorienting sometimes." "For what it's worth, I forget about those differences when I'm with you," he'd said. "That's probably why I didn't consider the dress issue. When I think about the gala, I just think about wanting you there with me." They'd resolved the immediate issue. Natalie had allowed Connor to buy her a dress, and the gala had actually been enjoyable, but the underlying tension occasionally resurfaced. Not because Connor flaunted his wealth or position, but because the disparity existed regardless of how they felt about it. For Connor, the challenge was different. He had dated successful, accomplished women before: executives, doctors, even another CEO. What he hadn't experienced was being with someone who was still building her path, whose future was taking shape day by day through hard work and determination. He admired Natalie's drive immensely, but he sometimes struggled with his instinct to clear obstacles from her way. When she mentioned staying up until 2 a.m. to complete a project after working a double shift, he had to resist offering to pay her rent so she could reduce her hours. When she described a particularly difficult professor who seemed determined to find flaws in her work, he refrained from suggesting he contact the dean, who happened to be on unknowingly biomedical's advisory board. He was learning that supporting Natalie meant respecting her journey, even when he had the means to make it easier. It was a new kind of challenge for someone accustomed to solving problems with resources or influence. As spring turned to summer, both Natalie and Connor found themselves navigating not only their feelings for each other, but the practical implications of building a life together across such different circumstances. Yet despite these occasional friction points, their connection continued to deepen, anchored in the genuine compatibility they discovered during those months of lunches at Bistro Soleil. The most significant test of their relationship came unexpectedly, nearly 7 months after Connor had first asked for Natalie's number. She had just completed her final exams for the semester, earning top marks despite her demanding work schedule. To celebrate, Connor had planned a weekend at a lakeside cabin a few hours' drive from the city, a chance for them to relax and reconnect after weeks of limited time together. The cabin, it turned out, was less rustic retreat and more luxury hideaway, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water, a gourmet kitchen, and amenities that rivaled 5-star hotels. Natalie had laughed when they arrived, taking in the stunning views and elegant furnishings. "When you said cabin, I pictured something a little more cabiny," she teased. "This is practically a resort." Connor had smiled somewhat sheepishly. "I wanted it to be special. You've been working so hard, you deserve some luxury." They had spent a perfect day hiking nearby trails, cooking together in the well-appointed kitchen, and watching the sunset from the deck. As they sat before the fireplace that evening, sharing a bottle of wine, Natalie felt a contentment she hadn't experienced before, a sense of being exactly where she belonged. "I've been thinking," Connor said, his voice thoughtful as he absently traced patterns on her hand. "Your lease is up next month, isn't it?" Natalie nodded. "Unfortunately, and they're raising the rent again. I'm looking at some places further from campus, but the commute would be challenging with my work schedule. What if you didn't renew? What if you moved in with me instead?" The suggestion wasn't entirely unexpected. They had been spending most nights together already, but the timing felt sudden. Natalie took a slow sip of wine, organizing her thoughts. "That's a big step," she said finally. "It is," Connor agreed, "but I think we're ready for it. I love having you in my space, and practically speaking, it would solve your housing issue. You wouldn't have to work as many shifts at the restaurant, which would give you more time for your studies and internships." Something about his phrasing gave Natalie pause. "So you want me to move in partly so I can work less?" "That's not the primary reason," Connor clarified quickly. "I want you to move in because I love you and want to build a life with you. But yes, I also think it could alleviate some of the pressure you're under. What's wrong with that?" Natalie carefully set down her wine glass. "Nothing's wrong with wanting to support each other, but I need to know that you want me, not a project to take care of." Connor looked genuinely confused. "Where is this coming from? When have I ever treated you like a project?" "You haven't exactly. But sometimes the way you talk about helping with my career or making things easier for me, it feels like you see me as someone who needs fixing." She took a deep breath. "I've worked incredibly hard to get where I am, Connor. I've paid my own way, made my own opportunities. That matters to me." "I know that," he said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "And I admire it tremendously. I'm not trying to take away your independence. I just want to share what I have with the woman I love." "But what do I bring to the equation if I'm living in your condo, potentially working less, benefiting from your connections? How do we maintain equality in that scenario?" Connor's expression softened. "Is that what you're worried about? That you wouldn't be contributing enough?" When she nodded slightly, he continued. "Natalie, what you bring to my life can't be measured in rent payments or career achievements. Before you, I was just going through the motions. Work, meetings, business dinners, repeat. You've made me happier than I've been in years, possibly ever." His sincerity was evident, but Natalie still felt conflicted. "I believe you mean that, but I also know how easy it would be to become dependent on your lifestyle, your resources, and that scares me." "What if we approached it differently?" Connor suggested after a moment's thought. What if we found a new place together? Somewhere that would be ours, not just mine that you're moving into. We could establish terms that feel fair to both of us. The compromise showed he was listening, trying to understand her perspective rather than simply dismissing her concerns. It was one of the qualities that had drawn her to him from the beginning. That might work, she acknowledged, but I'd need to contribute financially in a meaningful way. Even if it's not an equal split, it needs to be substantial enough that I don't feel like a guest in my own home. Connor nodded, relief evident in his expression. We can figure that out together, whatever makes you comfortable. He reached for her hand again. I just want to fall asleep next to you every night and wake up with you every morning. The details are negotiable. As they continued talking into the night, working through practical considerations and emotional concerns, Natalie realized that this was perhaps the true test of their relationship, not whether they could enjoy each other's company or share physical chemistry, but whether they could navigate real differences in background, resources, and expectations, while still respecting each other's core values. By the time they returned to the city on Sunday evening, they had reached a tentative agreement. They would look for a new apartment together, one that Natalie could contribute to meaningfully while still being comfortable for both of them. They would maintain separate finances for now, but create a joint account for shared expenses. And Natalie would continue working at Bistro Soleil until she completed her degree, though perhaps with slightly reduced hours. The compromise wasn't perfect, but it represented something important: a willingness on both sides to adapt without abandoning their principles. For Connor, it meant accepting that Natalie needed to maintain her independence, even if he could easily support them both. For Natalie, it meant allowing Connor to share his resources without viewing it as a threat to her autonomy. Over the next few weeks, they visited numerous apartments, weighing location against cost, amenities against practicality. They eventually settled on a spacious two-bedroom with a view of the city park, significantly more modest than Connor's downtown condo, but far nicer than Natalie could have afforded on her own. The second bedroom would serve as a home office for both of them, with designated spaces for Connor's work and Natalie's studies. Moving day arrived in early July, bringing with it the chaotic blending of two lives into one shared space. Connor's expensive minimalist furniture looked surprisingly at home alongside Natalie's more eclectic, budget-conscious pieces. His state-of-the-art kitchen appliances found new purpose as Natalie introduced him to the joy of cooking together rather than ordering in. Her textbooks and study materials claimed equal space on the bookshelves beside his business volumes and medical reference texts. As they unpacked the last boxes and collapsed onto the couch that evening, a new purchase they'd selected together, Connor pulled Natalie close against his side. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Exhausted," she laughed. "But yes, happy." She looked around their new space, already feeling the rightness of their shared home. "It feels like we've created something that's truly ours, not just yours or mine." "That was the goal," Connor replied. "Though I have to say, I'm particularly pleased with how your horrific yellow reading chair looks in the corner of the bedroom." "Hey, that chair has character," Natalie protested, poking him in the ribs. "Unlike that soulless modern art you insisted on hanging in the hallway." Their playful bickering dissolved into laughter, and then into a comfortable silence as they sat together in their new home, the city lights twinkling beyond the windows. The journey from server and customer to partners sharing a life had been unexpected for both of them, filled with adjustments and compromises. But sitting there together, they both felt the certainty that it had been worth every step. The months that followed brought new rhythms and routines as they settled into life together. Connor found unexpected pleasure in the domestic patterns that emerged Natalie's humming as she studied at the kitchen island. The scent of her shampoo lingering in the bathroom. The way she absently reached for his hand while watching movies on the couch. For her part, Natalie discovered that sharing her life with Connor didn't diminish her independence as she'd feared instead. It created a foundation from which she could pursue her goals with greater confidence. His support was practical but never controlling, his interest in her studies and career genuine rather than performative. Their different backgrounds continued to create occasional friction points. Connor sometimes forgot the value of money in ways that stunned Natalie, like casually suggesting a weekend trip to Paris, as if it were a drive to the next town. Natalie occasionally bristled at events where Connor's colleagues unconsciously emphasized the disparity in their positions, asking her questions that implied surprise at his choice of partner. But with each challenge, they found their way back to the core of their connection, the genuine respect and affection that had first developed across a restaurant table. They learned to laugh at their missteps, to communicate more clearly about their expectations, to appreciate rather than resent their differences. As Natalie's graduation approached, she found herself at another crossroads. Her degree in marketing and business administration had opened several promising doors, including an assistant manager position at an upscale hotel group and a marketing coordinator role with a restaurant development company. "Both offers are excellent," Connor observed as they discussed her options over dinner one evening. "The hotel position probably has a clearer advancement track, but the restaurant group seems more aligned with your specific interests." "That's my thought exactly," Natalie nodded. "The money's better with the hotel, but the restaurant group is doing really innovative work with concept development." Connor took a sip of his wine, his expression thoughtful. "You know, there's a third option we haven't discussed." "Oh." "O'Neill Biomedical is expanding our corporate events division, conferences, training programs, client hospitality. We need someone with hospitality experience and marketing knowledge to develop and implement the strategy." He held up a hand as Natalie's expression turned skeptical. "Before you say no, hear me out. This wouldn't be me giving you a job. You'd interview with the division director like any other candidate. I wouldn't be involved in the hiring decision or your direct management chain." Natalie set down her fork, considering. "You really think I'm qualified?" "I wouldn't suggest it otherwise," Connor replied seriously. "Your combination of practical hospitality experience and marketing education is exactly what they're looking for. But I want to be clear, you should only pursue this if it genuinely interests you, not because of our relationship." The fact that he understood her concerns without her having to voice them reinforced Natalie's confidence in their partnership. "I'll think about it," she promised. "No matter what, I appreciate that you respect my need to establish myself on my own merits." In the end, Natalie decided to interview for all three positions, approaching each with equal seriousness. The process with O'Neill Biomedical was particularly rigorous, involving multiple rounds with different managers, none of whom mentioned her connection to Connor. When she received offers from all three companies, her decision was based on the opportunity itself rather than its relation to Connor. "I'm going with the restaurant development group," she told him one evening as they walked home from dinner. "The creative aspect of the role really appeals to me, and I love that I'll be involved from concept development through launch." Connor squeezed her hand, his smile genuine. "I think that's the perfect choice for you. Though I have to admit, a small part of me is disappointed we won't be having lunch together in the company cafeteria." "As if you eat in the cafeteria," she laughed. "Besides, this way I can maintain my professional identity separate from being the CEO's girlfriend. That matters to me." "I know it does," he acknowledged, "and I respect that completely, though I was thinking." He paused, seeming uncharacteristically hesitant. "Yes," Natalie prompted, curious about his sudden shift in demeanor. "Maybe someday you might be comfortable with a different title. Something more permanent than girlfriend." Natalie's heart quickened at the implication. "Are you proposing a promotion?" she asked lightly, though her pulse was racing. "Not right now," Connor clarified with a small smile, "but I wanted you to know it's on my mind. That I see us as long-term, permanent if you want that too." The casual yet profound acknowledgement of their future together filled Natalie with unexpected emotion. "I do want that," she said softly, "when the time is right." The right time came 6 months later, after Natalie had established herself at the restaurant development company, and they had settled comfortably into their shared life. Connor had planned a weekend getaway, telling Natalie only that she should pack for moderate weather and casual activities. To her surprise, their destination was Bistro Soleil, closed to the public for a private dinner just for them. The familiar space had been transformed with soft lighting and flowers, table 7 set elegantly in the otherwise empty restaurant. "How did you arrange this?" Natalie asked, amazed as they were seated by her former manager, who winked before disappearing into the kitchen. "I may have called in a favor with the owner," Connor admitted. "I wanted to bring us back to where it all started." The meal was a journey through their history together, dishes Connor had ordered during those months of lunches, each one carrying memories of their early conversations. Between courses, Connor shared what he'd been thinking during those times, how he'd looked forward to seeing her, how he'd deliberately scheduled important meetings around his visits to the restaurant. "I knew after the third lunch that you were special," he confessed. "I kept coming back partly for the food, but mostly for the chance to talk with you for those few minutes. I rearranged my entire weekly schedule around it. And I thought you just really liked the salmon," Natalie teased, though she was deeply touched by the revelation. As dessert was served the chocolate torte she'd once recommended that had become his favorite. Connor reached across the table to take her hand. "Natalie, meeting you changed everything for me. Before you, I was focused entirely on building my company, measuring success in contracts and growth metrics. You showed me a different kind of success, the kind that comes from genuine connection, from being truly known and accepted by another person." He took a breath, his blue eyes holding hers intently. "You've brought joy and balance to my life in ways I never expected, and I can't imagine my future without you in it." With that, he stood and moved to her side of the table, lowering himself to one knee as he withdrew a small velvet box from his pocket. Natalie's hand flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes as she realized what was happening. "Natalie Ziegler, will you marry me?" The ring he offered was elegant but not ostentatious, a perfect oval diamond in a simple platinum setting that somehow reflected both his taste for quality and his understanding of her preference for understated elegance. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, absolutely yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her, applause erupted from the kitchen doorway, where the restaurant staff had gathered to witness the moment. Natalie laughed through her tears as her former colleagues rushed forward with congratulations and champagne. Later that night, as they lay together in the luxury hotel suite Connor had booked nearby, Natalie held up her hand, watching the diamond catch the light. "I can't believe you proposed at Bistro Soleil," she mused. "Though I suppose it's fitting, considering how many important moments we've shared there." "It seemed right," Connor replied, his fingers tracing lazy patterns along her arm. "That's where I first saw you, where I first heard your laugh, where I finally worked up the courage to ask for your number." I never expected you'd actually give it to me, you know. Really, you seemed so confident. I was terrified, he admitted with a chuckle. I'd been planning what to say for weeks. I thought you'd politely decline beautiful server gets asked out by customers all the time. Why would I be any different? When you wrote down your number, I was so surprised I nearly forgot to leave a tip. Good thing you remembered, she teased. I might have reconsidered if you hadn't. As they drifted toward sleep, Natalie reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From those first brief exchanges across a restaurant table to planning a shared future, their path had been unexpected but somehow inevitable, two people recognizing in each other something essential and true. The wedding took place the following spring, an elegant but intimate affair that reflected both their tastes. Natalie's former co-workers from Bistro Soleil were among the guests, along with her classmates and new colleagues. Connor's business associates mingled with Natalie's family. The disparate worlds they came from blending more seamlessly than either had imagined possible. During the reception, Eliza, the co-worker who had first teased Natalie about her businessmen, raised a glass for an impromptu toast. To the power of persistence, she grinned, and to table 7, where it all began. As Connor pulled Natalie close for their first dance as husband and wife, he whispered against her hair, "Best lunch order I ever made." Natalie smiled up at him, thinking of all the twists and turns that had led them here: the initial attraction, the months of brief conversations, the moment of courage when he'd asked for her number, the countless adjustments and compromises they'd made to build a life together. "I'm glad you had a healthy appetite," she replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him as their guests applauded around them. 2 years later, Connor and Natalie welcomed their daughter, Olivia, into the world. As Connor held his newborn daughter for the first time, overcome with emotion, Natalie watched them with tear-filled eyes. "She has your eyes," she observed softly. "That same intense blue." "But your smile, I think," Connor replied, gently tracing their daughter's tiny features. "She's perfect." In the quiet of the hospital room, with their new family complete, both reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them together. A chance decision to try a new restaurant. Months of brief exchanges that somehow built a foundation of genuine connection. The courage to cross the boundary between customer and server, between professional acquaintance and something more personal. You ever think about how different our lives would be if you hadn't come into Bistro Soleil that first day? Natalie asked, reaching for Connor's hand as he sat beside her bed, their daughter sleeping peacefully in her bassinet. "I think about it all the time," he admitted. "One different turn, one different decision, and we might never have met." He squeezed her hand gently. "But somehow, I think we would have found each other anyway." "How very romantic of you, Mr. CEO," she teased, though her eyes shone with the same conviction. "Only with you," he smiled, leaning forward to kiss her forehead. "Only ever with you." As they settled into parenthood, balancing Connor's leadership of his growing company with Natalie's advancing career in restaurant concept development, they maintained the balanced partnership they'd worked so hard to establish. Their different backgrounds and perspectives had become strengths rather than obstacles, each bringing unique insights to their shared challenges. And every year, on the anniversary of their first real date, they returned to Bistro Soleil for lunch, sitting at table 7, and remembering how an ordinary Tuesday had become the first page of their extraordinary story. "To taking chances," Connor would toast, raising his glass to the woman who had transformed his life with a simple act of trust, writing her number on a server's notepad when a customer gathered the courage to ask. "To seeing people, not positions," Natalie would respond, thinking of how she had looked past the suit and status to recognize the man who would become her partner in every sense of the word. And sometimes, when the restaurant was particularly busy, they would exchange knowing glances as they watched their server navigate the controlled chaos of the lunch rush, remembering how their own story had unfolded in stolen moments between courses, in brief conversations that somehow contained the seeds of a lifetime together.